Dreshu Nityam Bhagavad Sevaya Bhagavate Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavatir Naistiki Oma Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukham Karoti Vachanam Pangam Nangate Giri Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Guru Deenataranam Paramanandam Madhavam. Hare Krishna. Thank you once again. So the fourth canto, sixth chapter is titled Brahma Satisfies Lord Shiva. And this chapter follows the destruction of the yajna by the followers of Lord Shiva. So when Lord Shiva heard about Sati Devi giving up her body, then he pulls out a few strands of his hair and creates Veerbhadra, who is, he says that you are as good as me because you're a part of me. Then Veerbhadra goes back to the sacrificial arena of Yajna, of Daksha, and there they desecrate the area. They punish several devas and they kill Daksha and go back. So the devas are now very, very scared. They're scared of two things. They're scared that Lord Shiva is still angry, and having witnessed the prowess of Lord Shiva, it is understandable that they're scared. And they're also scared of the offenses of completing a yajna or not completing a yajna. Because remember, these are karmakanda yajnas. Brahma had, when Brahma created his children, then he entrusted karmakanda to Daksha. He entrusted Jnanakanda to the four Kumars. And he entrusted Bhakti to Narad Muni. So Daksha was an expert in karmakanda. And karmakanda yajnas, there are severe consequences. If the yajna is not performed properly, incomplete, the result could be the opposite for the performer as well as for the participants. So they're scared for these two, so they go to Brahma. They go to Brahma, and initially Brahma chastises them. He glorifies the position of Lord Shiva and says that even I cannot compare to him. And how could you act in such a way? How could you offend him? And then much like a father, he said, okay, now come with me and we will collectively go to the abode of Lord Shiva and ask for his forgiveness. So this is where this verse begins. The next set of verses are almost 21 verses. They are a description of Mount Kailash and the region Alaknanda. Not significant purports, mostly a vivid description of the area. 469. Janma siddhi tapo mantra yoga siddhe naretare justam kinar gandharve apsrabhivratham sada. The abode known as Kailash is full of different herbs and vegetables. and it is sanctified by Vedic hymns and mystic yoga practice. Thus, the residents of the abode are demigods by birth and have all mystic powers. Besides them are other human beings who are known as Kinnars and Gandharvas, who are accompanied by the beautiful wives who are known as Apsaras or angels. So, description of Kailash and the residents of Kailash. That it has those who are yogis, those who are perfect in the recitation of the Vedas, and then so the Gandharvas and the Kinnars are considered to be the lower category of the divine beings. So besides them, it says there are Kinnars and Gandharvas who are accompanied by the Apsaras. So from here till verse 22, Maitreya will describe what the Devas saw as they approached Mount Kailash. Verse 10. Nana mane mehe shringe nanada excuse me. Nana dhatur vichitrate Nana druma lata gulme Nana mraga ganavrata. Kailash is full of mountains, filled with all kinds of valuable jewels and minerals, and surrounded by all varieties of valuable trees and plants. The top of the hill is nicely decorated by various types of deer. Nana mala prashavane, nana kandar shanubi, ramanam viharantinam, ramani siddhayorshitam. There are many waterfalls, and in the mountains there are many beautiful caves in which the very beautiful wives of the mystics are found. So Ramanaya means with their lovers. So Kailash is famous because it gives Ramanam, it gives pleasure to the wives of the perfected beings who sport there with their husbands. So while these verses are describing Mount Kailash, they're also giving us a glimpse into the lives of those who are more advanced than us. So we see that as one becomes more advanced, variety increases. So sometimes people consider spiritual advancement to be neti, neti, neti. That you give up, and then you become spiritually advanced. But actually, as you become spiritually advanced, then both the ability to feel pleasure and the opportunities to feel pleasure increase. And ultimately, when you go back to the spiritual world, then both the opportunities and the abilities to experience happiness is infinite. It's said that the happiness in this material world is like a drop to the ocean of the happiness experienced in liberation, which is a drop to the ocean of the happiness felt in Vaikuntha, which is a drop to the ocean of the happiness felt in Golok Vrindavan. So the reason these verses describe this variety in details is to indicate to us that advancement means more relationships, more fulfilling relationships, more loving pastimes. The only thing that actually goes away is the conception of false ego. Verse 12. Mayur ke kavirutam madandhali vimurchitam lavitairaka kanthanam kujate sacha patatrinam. On Kailash Hill, there is always the rhythmical sound of the peacock's sweet vibration and the bees humming. Cuckoos are always singing, and other birds whisper amongst themselves. So, Abhi means the cry of the peacocks is everywhere. And the noise, which is similar to the talking among a group of householders. So, how do the householders talk? So, that is generally considered to be Prajalpa. So Prajalpa is just gossiping. So, but when the householders talk, then the noise is diffused because everybody wants to speak. There is no listener. One interrupts the other person forcibly and talks, and then another person interrupts the person. So Maitreya is kind of describing that there is this sound in the background, the humming sound, as if the householders are talking. And the bees that are blinded with intoxication are like the singers who intone various rags with notes and improvisations and modulations. This is Vimurchitam. And that the cries of the cuckoos and the other birds are long drawn out. Another meaning of Vimurchitam, that they fill the body with air, and when they let a note out, then the note will last for a long time. So in contrast to the noise in the background that resembles the gossip of the householders, which is diffused, this sound is long and sustained, and together they mix to create a very pleasant sensation. Avayantam ivadaste dvijan kam dugir drumahi vrajantam iva matangir granatam iva nirhari. There are tall trees with straight branches that appear to call the sweet birds. And when the herds of elephants pass through the hills, it appears that the Kailash hill moves with them. When the waterfalls resound, it appears that the Kailash hill does also. So Vishwanath Chakravarti said that the birds are like Brahman guests being invited by the mountain. And when the elephants move because of their large body, they create reverberations in the mountain, and the mountain seems to move along with the elephants. And the waterfalls, it appears to be as if the mountain is talking. Fourteen, 15. Mandare prajitaischa sarleschopa-shobhitam tamalahe shalatailascha ko vidhasanarjuna chute kadambe nipescha nagapunaga champakaha patala shoka bapulehi kundahi kurbakerapi. The whole of Kailash hill is decorated with various kinds of trees, of which the following name may be mentioned: Mandar, Parijat, Saral, Tamal, Tal, Kovidar, Asan, Arjun, Amarjati, Mango, Kadamba, Dhulikadam, Nag, Kunag, Champak, Patal, Ashok, Bakul, Kunda, and Kurubak. The entire hill is decorated with such trees, which produce flowers with fragrant aromas. So Chuta and Amar are types of mango trees. And Neep is a variety of Kadam that is called Dhuli Kadam. Krishna Chakravarti comments on this. Verse 16. Swarnan Satpatrescha Varare Lukha Jatibihi Kubjakir Malikyabescha Madhavabescha Mandatam. There are other trees also which decorate the hill, such as the golden lotus flower, the cinnamon tree, Malati, Kubja, Malika, and Madhavi. So Renuka is known is the cardamom, elaichi trees, and Jati is jasmine. 17. Panasudum barasvataha lakshanyugrod hingubihi Burje Rashadibi Pugaye Raja Pugaye Chajambuhi. Kailash Hill is also decorated with such trees as Kata, jackfruit, Jular, banyan tree, Palakshas, Nugrodhas, and trees producing asafoetida. Also, there are trees of betel nuts and Bhurjapatra, as well as Rajapuga, blackberries, and similar other trees. 18. Kharjaru Tukamardhai Priyal Madhu Ken Gudahi Drumajad Biranescha Rajtam Vena Kichkahi. There are mango trees, Priyal, Madhuk, and Ingud. Besides this, there are other trees like thin bamboo, Kichak, and varieties of other bamboo trees, all decorating the tract of Kailash. So Venu is a category of bamboo which is solid within, and the Kichaka is a bamboo which is hollow within. So sometimes the bamboo is solid and it's used as a stick, and sometimes when it is hollow, it is used as a flute, or it is used to draw water. So Venu says when it is solid, and Kichaka says when it is hollow. Verse 19-20. Kumuddot palakahala satpatra vanardabhihi nalinishu kalam pujat Khaga vrando pashobitam Mrige sakra mrige krode Mrigendri raksha shalyakahi Guvaya sharbir vyagre Rurubir maheshadibi. There are different kinds of lotus flowers, such as Kumud, Utpal, and Shatpatra. The forest appears to be a decorated garden, and the small lakes are full of various kinds of birds who whisper very sweetly. There are many kinds of other animals also, like deer, monkeys, boars, lion, rikshas, shalakyas, forest cows, forest asses, tigers, small deer, buffalo, and many other animals who are fully enjoying their lives. Verse 21. Karnadrake kapadashasvashver nishutam vrkanabhihi kada likhanda samruddha Nalini Pulina Shriyam. There are varieties of deer, such as the Karnatra, Ekapat, Ashvasya, Vrk, and Kasturi, the deer which bears musk. Because the deer there are, besides the deer, there are many banana trees which decorate the small hillside lakes very nicely. So the mountain is made beautiful by river banks covered with banana groves. And a particular kind of deer that is mentioned here is Nabhi. So Nabhi is the musk deer, also called Kasturi, because they carry the scent of the musk in their navel. And it is said that even though they carry this scent within themselves, they wander all over the forest trying to locate the origin of the fragrance. So the Kasturi deer is often used in analogies for the transcendental search, aspiring spiritualists, that you carry the Paramatma in your heart, and just like a Kasturi mriga, it carries the musk within its. But still, it travels all over the forest looking, where is this smell coming from? So the Jiva carries Paramatma within himself, and he travels everywhere looking for the personality of Godhead. So earlier also we saw how in the Bhagavatam there is a lot of very detailed description given, and one could wonder that, like we saw the description of Vaikuntha, right? When the four Kumaras, or when Brahma got the vision, then there's a detailed description of Vaikuntha. Then in the third canto, there's a detailed description of Kardama Muni, and now we see there is a detailed description of Lord Shiva. And as I mentioned, that they're all there to emphasize this common theme of variety. There is variety of flora and fauna. So there's variety of plants, there is variety of animals, variety of relationships. And with the same sense of variety, the Lord also presents himself to the variety of his devotees who relate to him in a variety of ways. So even though the Lord is one, but he presents himself in unlimited ways, because his devotees have unlimited. Not sure what's going on. Now it's saying recording stopped.
Prem Kishore Prabhu got disconnected.
Prem Kishore Prabhu. Oh. I'm wondering if I can start the recording. Where does the recording start from? There's the recording. On this computer or record to the cloud?
No, only the host. Do you have the rights, Prabhu? Do you see record?
I seem to. Should I record to the? I should record to the cloud, right?
No, Prabhuji, on your laptop will be good. In the cloud, sometimes it doesn't record.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we see how different this is, that the impersonalists, they worship rejecting variety. But we see that in every nuance of existence, there is variety. And as the existence becomes more and more advanced and purified, the variety increases. And even amongst devotees, so this is, now I'm speaking about us, variety is important, because only through variety can one create a community? Right? If you only preach to one class of people, you only preach to men and not to women, or you only preach to Americans and not to anybody else, or only to Indians and not to anybody else. So that will create an imbalance, which is destined to fail. Because intrinsically, Krishna consciousness is full of diversity. And unfortunately, from a material perspective, there is a determined effort to eliminate diversity. So there are all these statistics that say that there are so many species of plants and animals that have disappeared. Even in terms of cultivation. I remember when I was a child, as part of our school visit, we had gone to visit the Agriculture Research Center. And then they were talking about, how they were cultivating more than 500 varieties of rice. And now there are less than a dozen varieties of rice. So in plants that they're cultivating, in animals that they're cultivating, they're, for the sake of efficiency, they're eliminating variety. And by eliminating variety, they're going against the nature of existence. It is through variety prosperity comes. It is through variety happiness comes. There was a study done by a scientist on education that when a child is 2 years old, then 98% of the children think differently, or think in a variety of different ways. After they have gone through the process of education, by the time they're 21, only 2% of the people can think differently. Almost everybody else has been trained to think the same. So that's the nature of education. For the sake of efficiency, they eliminate variety. Now, variety does not mean that yathomat tatopat, right? Variety does not mean that, okay, you worship Krishna your way, I worship my way. But it means that there is unity in diversity. For instance, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we see that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he gave a variety of instructions to his followers. Right? To Mukunda, he said, you gain material and spiritual wealth. To Raghunandan, he said, you focus on deity worship. To Narahari Sarkar, he said, you take sannyas and preach. But they were all unified in the underlying theme of using your inherent propensity to serve Krishna. Like in the 6th canto, Narad Muni says that one way or the other, you must bring your mind to Krishna. Right? So the unity is bring your mind to Krishna. The variety is one way or the other. In the Madhya Leela, Prabhupada says, this is chapter 10, verse 113, that Bhakti Siddhanta Viruddha refers to that which is against the principle of unity in diversity. So Bhakti Siddhanta Viruddha. Viruddha means that is an opposition. And so what is the Bhakti Siddhanta? It is unity in diversity. And then he makes a very interesting statement. He says, unity in diversity philosophically is known as Achinta Bheda Bhed Tattva, which is the essence of what Mahaprabhu explains as the relationship of everything with Krishna. So that is he says, Prabhupada continues in the purport, simultaneous oneness and difference. Whereas Rasabhas is something that may appear to be transcendental mellow, but actually is not. So, for instance, when devotees do deity dressing, when they're doing deity dressing, then each devotee has a very particular mood. And when there is the Shringara Darshan, then everybody comes and appreciates that diversity. And after some time, they begin to recognize this devotee has dressed today, the turbans are like this, or this devotee tends to use this style of dressing. So there's a lot of diversity. But then there is some basic principles that are not violated. Krishna is dressed in a certain way, Srimati Radharani is dressed in a certain way, Gauranitai is dressed in a particular way. So there is some decorum that is maintained. There are some principles of deity worship that are followed. But when these two come together, that's when one experiences real happiness. And actually, Prabhupada says that is also the tattva, because it's happiness is rasa. So he's saying it's not only rasa, it's also tattva. And it makes sense that the rasa has to come from tattva. So it cannot speak, it cannot be on something, on a different platform. Okay, moving on, verse 22. Paryasatam nandaya satya snan punya tarodaya vilokya bhutesh girim vibudha vishmayam yahu. There is a small lake named Alakanand in which Sati used to take her bath, and that lake is specially auspicious. All the demigods, after seeing the specific beauty of Kailash Hill, were struck with wonder at the great opulence to be found there. So Prabhupada says that according to the commentary of Sri Bhagavad Chandra Chandrika, the water in which Sati used to bathe was Ganges water. In other words, the Ganges flowed through the Kailash Parvat. There is every possibility of accepting such a statement because Ganges water also flows from the hair of Lord Shiva. Since Ganges water rests on the head of Lord Shiva and then flows to the other parts of the universe, it is quite possible that the water in which Sati bathed, which was certainly very nicely scented, was Ganges water. Okay. Verse 23. Dadrushos tatrate ramyam alakam nam vaipurim vanam sogendikam chapi yatra tannam pankajam. Thus the demigods saw the wonderfully beautiful region known as Alaka, in the forest known as Sogandika, which means full of fragrance. The forest is known as Sogandika because of its abundance of lotus flowers. So previously was a description of Kailash. Now we will see in 8 verses, 9 verses actually, up to verse 31, a description of the Alaka region. So the Alaka is a region within the Kailash hill in which Lord Shiva resides. And the literal meaning of Alaka is uncommonly beautiful. So Prabhupada says sometimes Alaka is known as Alakapuri, which is also the abode of Kuvera. Kuvera's abode, however, cannot be seen from Kailash. Therefore, the region of Alaka referred to here is different from the Alakapuri of Kuvera. According to Veera Raghava Acharya, Alaka means uncommonly beautiful. In the region of Alaka that the demigods saw, there is a type of lotus flower known as Saugandhika that distributes a especially fragrant scent. So there's a little bit of this and that. That in this verse, Prabhupada says that the Alkapuri here is not the abode of Kuber, and later on, in another verse, Prabhupada states that it is actually the abode of Kuber. So this is just the case of where it is said that this is it's just the conceptions of different scholars that Prabhupada is presenting. It does not make substantive factual differences. Verse 24. Nanda chalakan nanda cha sarito bhayatah purah tirthapad padamboja raja rajasa tiva pavane. They also saw the two rivers named Nanda and Alakananda. These two rivers are sanctified by the dust of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda. So outside the city of Alaka is, or Alakapuri is none than Alakananda. And in the two verses back, in verse 22, it is mentioned that these rivers are essentially manifestation of the river Ganges. And this point is made again over here. It's said that they are Tirthapad Padamboja, that they are the lotus, they're emanating from the lotus feet of the Lord, which is the none other than the holy river Ganga. Verse 25. Yaya Surastriya Kshata Avaruya Swadhishanyataha Kridanti Pumsha Sanchantyo Vigayarati Karshitaha. My dear Kshata, Vidur, the celestial damsels came down to those rivers in their airplanes with their husbands, and after sexual enjoyment, they enter the water and enjoy sprinkling their husbands with water. So Srila Prabhupada has a wonderful long purport on this, and I just wanted to summarize the points. So he says that the damsels of the heavenly planets come down to be refreshed in these rivers. So the reason is that the water is purified because of its contact with the lotus feet of Krishna. So Prabhupada says it is significant that these rivers Nanda and Alakananda are sanctified by the dust of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then Prabhupada proceeds to say that if the enjoyment out of sex was eternal, then why would the wives or the husbands want to get relief from it? So what it means is that it is only a passing enjoyment, even in this exalted state of existence of the devas. So Prabhupada says that Rati Karshita means that the damsels become morose after sex enjoyment. Although they accept sex enjoyment as a bodily demand, afterwards they are not happy. And then because they are not happy, they come to seek relief. And where do they get relief from? They get relief from coming in contact with the personality of Godhead and his devotees. So he continues in the purport, and now he is actually referring to the previous verse. He says, The Supreme Personality of Godhead is described as Tripad. This was in the previous verse. I'm sorry, Tirthapad. Tirtha means sanctified place, and Pad means the lotus feet of the Lord. People go to a sanctified place to free themselves from all sinful reactions. In other words, those who are devoted to the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, automatically become sanctified. The Lord's lotus feet are called Tirthapad because under their protection, there are hundreds and thousands of saintly people who sanctify the sacred places of pilgrimage. So 2 reasons it's called Tirthapad. One is because it's the Lord's personality, it's the Lord's lotus feet. So it is a place of pilgrimage. And the second is because of the presence of the devotees of the Lord. Right? So the Goswami says that one should actually go to a place of pilgrimage, not just to take a bath, but to associate with the devotees over there. Okay, verse 26. Okay. So we'll do a couple of more verses, then pause for any discussion. Yayos tatshtan vibrashta nava kunkum pinjaram pitrasopi pibantyam baha ayayantu gajagaji. After the damsels of the heavenly planets bathe in the water, it becomes yellowish and fragrant due to the kumkum from their bodies. Thus the elephants come to bathe with their wives, the she-elephants, and they also drink the water, although not thirsty. So the elephants, they drink the water of these 2 rivers, not because they're thirsty, but because it has become fragrant. And the point is also made that just like the damsels of the heavenly planets come with their husbands to bathe in the water, the elephants also come. So not much difference. They are both fatigued by material existence, looking for relief in the spiritual, in the spiritual arena. So whether a person has the ability to enjoy as much as the demigods, or is limited, being in the animal's body, but material existence is still fatiguing. It is still distressing, and ultimately forces the jiva to seek relief. Verse 27. Karhem maharatna viman shatta shankulam justam punyajan stribir yathakam stadidghanam. The airplanes of the heavenly denizens are bedecked with pearls, golds, and many valuable jewels. The heavenly denizens are compared to clouds in the sky, decorated with occasional flashes of electric lightning. So Prabhupada once again makes the point, whenever Viman is used, Prabhupada brings our attention to this point, that in the Vedic literatures, in the Vedic times, there's a description of machines that fly in the air, but they're different from the airplanes. They fly on the subtle energy of the mantras. They don't create pollution. They have much more capability. They can travel much faster, like the Pushpak Viman of Ravan. Well, before Ravan's, it was Kuber's. It had this ability to become, it could become as large as a city. When Lord Ram returned after defeating Ravan, then the whole army was on the Pushpak Viman, and effortlessly it took them back. Okay, so we'll do one more verse and then pause. Or let me pause here because the next set of verses are together. Let me pause and see if there is any comments or discussion.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Just a comment, when you said variety, I was thinking about Prabhupada's family when somebody asks, what do you like to have as prasad? He said variety.
You said the what?
He said, I like variety.
Variety. Yeah, yes.
Because he
Prabhupada
said that,
actually, you're right, Prabhupada showed that because when he was spreading Krishna consciousness, then there was so much of variety: singing, dancing, study of the scriptures, deity worship, cooking. So people with different propensities could get fully engaged and be fully satisfied in that. So in a way, he was creating a microcosm of the spiritual world.
thank you.
Carrying on, verse 28. Varshana, you had something to add?
No, I mean, I think you mentioned this, but so, whenever like you rightly pointed out, I've been reading Bhagavatam with children, and they often, they're very, in one sense it excites them, but in another sense it's unbelievable for them when they see things like airplanes flying in the sky and in those times. And, they go to school and they learn, this is when, the Wright brothers did that. And so how would you tell little children about it?
It's it's a difficult it's a difficult bridge to make because when we accept the words in the Vedas, we have to accept it by faith. I remember having the same conversation with my son also, and he was saying that if it is described in the Vedas, then why don't we make it? And in one of the purpose, actually, Prabhupada, he quotes the name of a particular scripture, and he says that scripture has all the details in how to construct these vimans. And he was then asking that if it's all given, then why don't we construct it? And that would be a conclusive proof that the Vedas are accurate. And my take to that is that our biggest handicap right now is twofold, that we have incomplete knowledge of the Vedas, and we do not have people who are efficient enough or who are qualified enough. The same thing is kind of used like when it is mentioned that through the process of yajna, one can do so many things. We see that, through yajna, Dashrath had children. Through yajna, demons, Vritasur was created. So many things can be accomplished through yajna. But the knowledge was there completely, and they were qualified persons to do it. So both of that is missing right now. Factually speaking, Jiva Goswami says that 94% of the Vedic knowledge is lost. Only 6% of it is. And Tattva Sandarbha makes this. He calculates the different bodies of work that are present, and then he says 94% is lost. Only 6% is there. So it's kind of like you get an instruction manual about how to make something, and somebody pulls out 94% of the pages. And then to make matters worse, the person who's trying to use that to make something, that person is not fully well trained. So difficult to replicate it now. But ultimately, it's something that we have to accept, that yes, at those times, Even at this time, but in different realms, there are Vimans that can move at the speed of thought and that can expand and contract based on what is needed. It's mostly on faith.
Hi Krishna. I just one little comment. I thought I was going through the purport here, and I think you mentioned it earlier also, where these Vimanas that are described here are operating through a more subtle science. Just like like one place Prabhupada used the word yantra and mantra. Yantra means more mechanical. That's what we are accustomed to here. You know, all this technology and, you know, mechanical devices for soak engine or, you know, whatever, jet propulsion and all that. But these Vimanas are powered by mantra, which is a more subtle science that, you know, modern scientists and, you know, whoever, you know, hasn't grappled as yet. And that's my understanding. And I think you mentioned it, you know, earlier. So unless we become, let's say, familiar with that subtle science, you know, it is, you know, it becomes a mystery. And I think in one of the purpose also, it is said that there are some entities, you know, in the higher planets, Siddhaloka and wherever, they don't need flying machines even. They just could move from one planet, you know, to the other. And case in point is like Narada Muni. He doesn't need, you know, any kind of a, you know, machine or any kind of a carrier. So, you know, those were some thoughts, you know, that came to mind, you know, because I saw it in, I don't know if it's here or a little after Prabhupada talks about that. And I thought I heard you mention that, you know, earlier also.
Right. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and actually in this very purport that we're reading, Prabhupada says that on gross planet Earth, there are airplanes run by machine, but on other planets, the airplanes are run not by machines, but by mantric hymns. So yeah, they're powered by the subtle energy, and those mantras are, at least on the Earth planet and this current day and age, they're lost. And even the yantras, the designs are lost, or the ability of the people to understand those designs are lost. The nature of it's very interesting that the nature of Vedic knowledge is that it always clouds itself in direction, and even whether it is knowledge of very, very gross material aspects or the most transcendental aspects, it has this nature to cover itself. And the reason it does it is because it forces the person to take shelter of a guru. Otherwise, if the Vedas were just, somebody could buy a copy of Veda and read it and become an expert, then it would be like giving a sword in the hand of a monkey. The person is not qualified, but if he simply reads it and does it and follows through. So which is one reason why people tend to make fun of the Vedas, because the Vedas speak in indirection. They will speak in terms of flowers and fragrance, and they will speak in terms of the wind blowing and the rays of the sun. And but there is a science. There is a science behind it. So the Vedas are considered to be the greatest knowledge that are hidden in plain sight. When the Vedas are there, so they were available to everyone, at least when Srila Vyasadeva wrote it down. But by nature they cover themselves so that one needs to take shelter of a guru to uncover. And that's why even when people have parts of these Upavedas that talk about how to construct an airplane, they don't really speak about it as if it's an instruction manual. They speak about it poetically. They speak about it through metaphors. And there are not, the people who understand those metaphors are not there, or if they are there, they're not interested in explaining it to, just for mechanical advancement. So thank you for all these wonderful points and interesting discussion. Let's carry on to verse 28. Hitva yaksheshvara purim vanam sogandikam chata drumayekam madhuverhidyam chitramalya falachadaha. While traveling, the demigods passed over the forest known as Sogandika, which is full of varieties of flowers, fruits, and desired trees. While passing over the forest, they also saw the region of Yaksheshwara. So this will continue till verse 31, where on the way to the abode of Lord Shiva, they pass over Yaksheshwara. Yaksheshwara is essentially the city of Kubera. So this is where I was saying earlier on, the point is made that the city is not Kuber city. And here Vishwanath Chakravarti says that actually this is the city of Kuber, and Prabhupada also writes it in the purport. He says Yaksheshwara is also known as Kuber, and he is the treasurer of the demigods. In the description of him in Vedic literature, it is stated that he is fabulously rich. It appears from these verses that Kailash is situated near the residential quarters of Kubera. It is also stated here that the forests were full of desired trees. In Brahma Samhita, we learn about the desired trees which is found in the spiritual world, especially Krishna Lok, the abode of Lord Krishna. We learn here that such desired trees are also found in Kailash, the residence of Lord Shiva by the grace of Krishna. It thus appears that Kailash has a special significance. It is almost like the residence of Lord Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada is making this point because very soon Brahma will be making the same point. Verse 29, Raktakanta Khaganika Swarmantita Shatpadam Kalamam Sakula Preshtham Harando Jalashayam. In that celestial forest, where there are many birds whose necks were colored reddish and whose sweet sound mixed with the humming of the bees. The lakes were abundantly decorated with crying swans, as well as strong-stemmed lotus flowers. Prabhupada says the beauty of the forest was intensified by the presence of various lakes. It is described herein that the lakes were decorated with lotus flowers and with swans who played and sang with the birds and the humming bees. Considering all these attributes, one can imagine how beautiful this spot was and how much the demigods passing through enjoyed the atmosphere. So this is amazing to the Devas. So amongst the Devas are Indra, Surya, and their own abodes are fabulously opulent. But even they, when seeing the abode of Lord Shiva, are amazed by the beauty and the attractive environment over there. Okay, verse 30. Vana kunjara sankrishta hari chandan vayuna adhi punyachan strinam muhurun matayan manaha. All these atmospheric influences unsettled the forest elephants who flocked together in the sandalwood forest. And the blowing wind agitated the minds of the damsels there for further sexual enjoyment. So the minds of the woman were additionally, so it says Adi, agitated with desire. Since the fragrance that was spread, it incited lust. Prabhupada says that in the spiritual world, the Vaikuntha planet, the spiritualistic minds of the inhabitants are so much absorbed in the spiritual vibration of chanting the glories of the Lord that such enjoyment could not be surpassed by any other enjoyment, even sex, which is the culmination in the material world. In other words, in the Vaikuntha world, in spite of its better atmosphere and facilities, there is no impetus for sex life. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 259, Param Drishva Nivartate. Inhabitants of the Vaikuntha are so spiritually enlightened that in the presence of such spirituality, sex life is insignificant. And it's interesting that even when it is considered to be insignificant, it is described in the context of Vaikuntha, not in Golok, because in Golok, the conception does not exist. In Vaikuntha, so I was listening to a lecture just the past week, and the point was made that if a husband and a wife, they worship together, they can go together to Vaikuntha, and there they continue to serve together. But if they worship Krishna, then they go separately, depending on their own relationship, their own Siddha Pranali, they will go separately. So in Vaikuntha, there is still the notion of couples. And we saw that from the description of the Vaikuntha planet in the third canto, that there are couples, there are men and women. Now in the lecture, the speaker did not give the reference that where did he, but he's a sannyasi, obviously very well educated about the intricacies of the Vedas, so I would take his word for him. But the point that is made is that when one becomes qualified to go to Krishna Lok, then the relationship is of the Jiva with Krishna through his devotees, of course. So even this notion of being a couple does not arise. So the point that Smaraj was making was that when couples desire to continue their service in the spiritual realm, then they worship Vishnu and they go to Vaikuntha. So here in this purport, Prabhupada compares the material and the spiritual worlds. He says that in the material world, anything that is exquisite, it stirs lusty desires. Good aroma, good food, someone is very beautiful, somebody's voice is very exquisite, it will invariably stir lust. But in the spiritual world, that is absent. That everything is exquisite, but it is unable to stir anything but bhakti. So we see this specifically in the 20th verse of the third canto, 15th chapter, that the inhabitants of Vaikuntha travel in their airplanes that is made of lapis, lazuli, emerald, and gold. Although crowded by the consorts who have large hips and beautiful smiling faces, they cannot be stimulated to passion by their mirth and beautiful charms. Okay, carrying on, verse 31. Veduryakrit sopan, Veduryakrit sopana, Vapyutpal malinihi, Praptam kim purushir drishva, Tadashurvadam. They also saw that the bathing ghats and the staircases were made of Vaiduryaman. The water was full of lotus flowers. Passing by such lakes, the demigods reached a place where there was a great banyan tree. So from a far distance, they could see this large banyan tree. It says Arat. Arat means from very far off, they could see this banyan tree, indicating that it was a really large banyan tree. Verse 32. Sayojan Satotseda Aduna Vitpayataha Paryakrita Chal Chaya Chayo Nirindasthapavarjataha. The banyan tree was 800 miles high, and its branch spread over 600 miles around. The tree cast a fine shade, which permanently cooled the temperature. Yet there was no noise of birds. So in 10 verses, there is a description of the darshan of Lord Shiva by the demigods. So first begins by describing the tree under which it was sitting. So it is described as 100 yojans high, which is 800 miles, and 600 miles around. So because of its large size, it could be seen from a distance. And then Prabhupada says, generally where there are trees, there are nests, and the birds will congregate and in the evening and create noise. But it appears that this banyan tree was devoid of nests, and therefore it was calm, quiet, and peaceful. There was no disturbance from noise or heat, and therefore the place was just suitable for meditation. Tasmin mahayogmaye mumuksha sharne suraha dadrshu shivam ashanam tyaktamarsham ivantakam. The demigods saw Lord Shiva sitting under that tree, which was competent to give perfection to mystic yogis and deliver all people. As grave as time eternal, he appeared to have given up all anger. So under the tree, Sharane means which is the shelter to whom? Mumuksha, to those who are aspirants for liberation. And Mahayogamaya, which the tree bestowed yogic powers, Mahayogamaya, great yogic powers. So under this tree which has these qualities, the Devas saw Lord Shiva sitting. So Iva Antakam. So Antakam, Prabhupada translates as just like eternal time. And Antakam also means death. So Lord Shiva was sitting there appearing like death personified. But Tyakta Amarsham, that there was no signs of anger on him. It appeared that he had given up his anger. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada gives two understandings of the word Maha. So Maha is used in the context of Maha Yogamaya. So Prabhupada says that the word Maha Yogamaya is very significant. Yoga means meditation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Maha Yoga means those who engage in the devotional service of Vishnu. Meditation means remembering or smarana. There are 9 different kinds of devotional service, of which smaranam is one process. The yogi remembers the form of Vishnu within his heart. Thus, there are many devotees engaged in meditation on Lord Vishnu under the big banyan tree. So that is one interpretation of Yogamaya, means that it is pointing to those who are engaged in the devotional service of Vishnu. And then Prabhupada says that the Sanskrit word Maha is derived from the affix Mahat. This affix is used when there is a great number or quantity. So Maha Yoga means that there were many great yogis and devotees meditating on the form of Lord Vishnu. Generally, such meditators are desirous of liberation from material bondage, and they are promoted to the spiritual world, to one of the Vaikunthas. Liberation means freedom from material bondage or nishayans. So, Maha, Prabhupada says, one meaning of Maha is that great yoga. And the second meaning of Maha is that a great number of yogis were sitting. Verse 34. Sanandanaye mahasiddhaye shantehe samshant vigraham upashayamanam sakhyacha bharata guya karakshasham. Lord Shiva sat there, surrounded by saintly persons like Kuber, the master of the Guyaks, and the 4 Kumaras, who were already liberated souls. Lord Shiva was grave and saintly. So from this we can understand that all material as well as spiritual opulences were available to Lord Shiva. So Kuber was initially described as being fabulously rich. So when Kuber is sitting there ready to serve Lord Shiva, that means all the material opulences are available to him. And the 4 Kumars are described as already liberated souls. That means all the spiritual opulences are also available to serve Lord Shiva. The Prabhupada says that the 4 Kumaras were liberated from birth. And then he talks about the fact that when they came, they refused to follow Brahma's instructions, so he became angry. And when he became angry, then Lord Shiva appeared. So some of the commentators, when they comment on this pastime, they say that when there is a disagreement between the 2 sampradayas, the 3rd sampradaya appears. So Lord Brahma indicates the Brahma sampradaya, and the 4 Kumaras, they represent the Kumar sampradaya. So when Lord Brahma ordered the Kumaras to have children and the Kumaras refused, there was disagreement and the Rudras appeared, from whom the Rudra Sampradaya comes. Okay. Next verse, 35. Vidyatapo yugo patham. Sorry. Vidyatapo yoga patham. Asthitam tam adhishwaram. Charantam vishwa suhurdam. Vatsalya lokamangalam. The demigod saw Lord Shiva situated in his perfection as the master of the senses, knowledge, fruitive activities, and the path of achieving perfection. He was a friend of the entire world, and by virtue of his full affection for everyone, he was very auspicious. So this verse in summary describes the qualities of Lord Shiva. That he is Vidya Tapo Yoga Patham. That he is the shelter of knowledge, austerity, and yoga. So shelter meaning that he's the preceptor, that he gives knowledge, austerity, and astang yoga to his followers. And he himself, it says charantam, he himself performs austerity, not because he needs to, but for the benefit of the world. Prabhupada says that Lord Shiva is described as Adhishvara. Ishvara means controller, and Adhishvara particularly means controller of the senses. So later on in the purport, he says the reason Lord Shiva is glorified as Adhishvara is because of his devotion to Krishna. He says Lord Shiva is the emblem of self-protection, and therefore in the scriptures it is said Vaishnavayam Yathashambhu. Lord Shiva is a Vaishnava. Lord Shiva, by his actions within the material world, teaches all the conditioned souls how to engage in devotional service 24 hours a day. Therefore, he is described as Lokamangal, good fortune personified for all conditioned souls. Okay, so we'll do one more verse, and after that we'll pause and see if there's any discussion. Lingam chata pasabhishtam bhashmadanda jatajanam angena sandhyabra rucha chandralekham cha vibratam. He was seated on a deer skin and was practicing all forms of austerity. Because his body was smeared with ashes, he looked like an evening cloud. On his hair was the sign of a half moon, a symbolic representation. So previous verse described the qualities of Lord Shiva. This verse describes the symptoms of his austerities. So tapas abhishtam. Tapas abhishtam means that he is the symbol of all the Shaivites. And he is dressed in deer skin with matted hair. He has a staff, reddish limbs smeared with ashes. So all this is indicating his extreme renunciation and austerity. Prabhupada says that Lord Shiva's symptoms of austerity are not exactly those of a Vaishnava. Lord Shiva is certainly the number one Vaishnava, but he exhibits the feature for a particular class of men who cannot follow the Vaishnava principle. The Shaivites, the devotees of Lord Shiva, generally dress like Lord Shiva, and sometimes they indulge in smoking and taking intoxicants. Such practices are never accepted by the followers of Vaishnava rituals. And of course, such followers, they are not really followers of Lord Shiva. They are followers of their own mental conception. So Lord Shiva, because he was elevated by knowledge, he is describing as performing austerity. So when one has proper sambandha gyan, one can perform proper abhidaya. Now, the so-called followers of Lord Shiva, they lack the sambandha gyan. But they try to either follow something, so they either perform abhidaya, or they try to enjoy something, or they follow prayojan. So that is why it is specifically mentioned in the previous verse that Lord Shiva is Vidya Tapo Yoga Patha. Vidya. So Vidya is pointing to Sambandha Gyan. Based on that proper understanding, he is doing what he is doing. But the so-called followers of Lord Shiva, they lack the proper understanding. So even if they're doing tapo, even if they're doing austerities, as long as it is not properly situated in sambandh, it is useless. Also mentioned over here is that he was carrying the moon, and this pastime is mentioned in the 6th canto, 6th chapter actually. where Daksha in his second birth, he marries, he has 60 daughters. He first has some, Nagmuni makes them all sannyasis. So then he says, okay, I'll have daughters. So he has 60 daughters and 27 of them he gives to moon god. And then moon god is partial to Rohini, to one of the sisters. So the other sisters complain to Daksha or to the father that our husband is partial to Rohini. And Daksha unfortunately has a bad temper still. So he curses that the moon god, Soma, he will gradually wither away and die. So when Soma heard about this, he became very agitated for natural, obvious reasons. So he went to Brahma. Brahma said, I can't do anything. We worship Lord Shiva. So then he went to Prabhashetra. And there he constructed a Shivlinga and worshipped Lord Shiva. So Lord Shiva then mercifully he came and he said, I know this Daksha. He has a long history of being difficult. But unfortunately, I cannot negate his curse, but I can modify it. So when he modified it, he said that in the Krishna Paksha, as per the curse, you will decline and actually disappear. But then by my potency, I will create you again. So during the Shukla Paksha, you will grow. So because Lord Shiva is beyond the concept of time, then he is able to control the waxing and the waning of the moon. So then it is said that Soma was still depressed with his waxing and waning. So then Lord Shiva took pity on him and said that I will keep you forever on my forehead. And there are different versions of this pastime. According to some, Lord Shiva actually took a portion of the moon and put it on his forehead, because he's beyond time. Daksha's curse did not act over there. So when the moon disappears, then he uses the portion on his forehead and he uses that to again the Shukla Paksha, then it creates again. According to some, it was to console Soma. Soma said that everybody is laughing at me that I'm waxing and waning. So then Lord Shiva said, I'll put you on my forehead. So when people worship me, then they will also acknowledge your presence. So he and then the moon god was pacified. It is also said that the moon on the forehead of Lord Shiva, because the moon is a controlling deity of the mind, indicates that he has full control on the mind. Okay, so let me pause over here, and if you have any comments or discussion, you can have them now.
Okay. Hare Krishna, Prabhu, one more time. The Kailash that is being described here, where is it situated? Is it on the earthly Kailash or the Kailash in the spiritual realm?
The Kailash Parvat is, so you're saying where is this Kailash Parvat situated?
Yes.
It's in Shivaloka.
Where Shadashiv live? Or?
No, not where Sadashiv lives, but there's a Shivaloka in the material world also.
Okay.
So it is there. And the Kailash that is there on the Earth planet, it's like, there's a country which has embassies at different places. So rich people have houses in different places. So Lord Shiva has a house here in Kailash Parvat on Earth. But it's also in the heavenly realm.
Okay, thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. One question, Prabhuji. As the demigods are approaching Lord Shiva, when they are going, because they are approaching Lord Shiva with the purpose of apologizing, and you mentioned that the women of demigod, like they were sexually excited. seeing the sandalwood aroma and those things. Like I was thinking, Prabhuji, so is it a general explanation like the fragrance is like that, it attracts our insights lust, or it's a literally explanation of that scenario because they are already offended Lord Shiva and they are going to are approaching to apologize him and pacify him if required. So that is the mood they must be going. Can you please clarify that, Prabhuji?
So it's not that they became agitated. So I guess your question is that if they're going in a mood to appease Lord Shiva, why should they get sexually agitated by the aroma? That's not my understanding. My understanding is that when under other circumstances, when the demigods and their wives, they visited this place, then drawn by the fragrance and the beauty, etc., they became lusty.
Sure, Prabhuji. Thank you. Prabhuji, one more quick question, Prabhuji. In pictures, we see pictures means photos. We see on the head, in between the hair of Lord Shiva, there is moon is shown. So that is the literary presence of moon god, Prabhuji, or it is only a symbolic representation of. You are explaining the moon, keeping moon on the forehead of Lord Shiva. So it is something. So.
It's a good question. In the translation to this particular verse, Prabhupada translates it saying that it's a symbolic representation of the moon. And I would think that's what so because moon lives in his own planet, right? He has his own planet that he lives over there. So it's not that he's physically living on the forehead of Lord Shiva. What does it actually mean that the moon is on the forehead of Lord Shiva? Not very clear to me. But Prabhupada does say that it's symbolic.
Sure, Prabhuji. Thank you.
One point of clarification. From verses 9 to 22, a description of Kailash Hill is explained, and then from 23 to 31 is a description of the Alaka region. I'm just wondering, what's the Alaka region, and is it connected somehow with the Kailash Hill?
It is. So it's kind of like me, describing my neighborhood and then my house. So the Kailash region is it includes a wider area, and the Alaka region is more specific area in which Lord Shiva resides.
Okay.
And Prabhupada does say that Alkapuri is actually the abode of Kuber.
Okay. Thank you.
So Kuber is kind of like a tenant of Lord Shiva. When Ravan drove Kuber out of Lanka, then he took shelter of Lord Shiva to protect him from Ravan. So that time he started living in Alkapuri.
Hare Krishna.
Haribol Venugopal.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Prabhu, in verse 36, where Lord Shiva sitting on deer skin and practicing all forms of austerity is described, Prabhupada in purport, he says about Shaivites, they were generally dressed like Lord Shiva and indulge in smoking and taking on intoxicants, some of them. Just one clarification. Now, Lord Shiva dressing and or his activities, are they intentional with the purpose of like meeting these people where they are? Like we hear this principle of preaching or outreach, or it is just that his way and people with such inclinations get drawn to him in this form. Because knowledge-wise, you mentioned Shiva. Also, we hear in many scriptures he gives the highest transcendental knowledge. Is that kind of the idea of his attire, and then wanted some light on that?
That is my understanding, that in several places it's mentioned that the reason Lord Shiva is dressed in the way he is because of his extreme renunciation. That because even though he's the proprietor of Maya Devi, he owns everything, but he's fully detached, and that's why he dresses simply. And to some extent, the other point that you're making is also made, that in one of the verses it is said that because he gives his mercy to the most fallen, which are the ghosts and the spirits, he lives in the crematorium, and that's why his body is covered by the ashes of the crematorium. So mostly it's because it's a symptom of his renunciation and his mode of service. Not so much because he wants to attract people who dress in that way. Prabhupada mentioned this from the perspective that there are people who copy the externals of Lord Shiva without his internals. So they see that he's dressed in a certain way, so they grow matted locks and wear austere clothing, which is the externals of Lord Shiva, but internally he's always meditating on Krishna. But they don't follow his internals. They basically consume intoxicants or commit sinful activities. But to answer your question, my understanding is that Lord Shiva dresses in that way. It's a side effect. It's an unintended side effect of his extreme renunciation and austerity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Prem Kishore Prabhu, are you there? So when you dropped out, I started doing the recording on my laptop. Should I send it to you, or what should I do with it? You're on mute, Prabhu, I think. Still can't hear you. Okay, no worries. We'll figure it out. So for now, I'll save it, and then if you can text me and let me know what needs to be. So we'll stop here. Vanchakalpatarubhayaschet kripa sindhu vyayevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hi, Gaur Hare Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Krishna, thank you.